So with this now, we're going to open up for question and answer. So I will ask the panel 3 questions, but I really would like you to ask questions too. So it's okay if we don't go through the questions I have up there. Let's try to make it interactive. As you saw, we have a very wide range of enterprises here. They all have different needs and business cases. They all did it at their own pace for their own internal reason, right? We heard Microsoft because they needed to support their product teams. That really was the main driver to start with, eating their own dog food. And then you had, at the other end of the spectrum, Airbus was reacting to making sure that their partners was able to communicate with them and do business with them, because for them, that's a business continuity issue. And you have pretty much in between. I would classify the DoD network as being a special network because they were really, really leading the pack. And, the way they've approached the transition should actually be a benchmark for many. First thing they thought about was security, which Ron didn't really talk about. But at the foremost, you need to realize the status quo is not an option, and you've got to handle your security aspect as you introduce a new protocol, which I'm sure everyone is looking at this. So let's go through the question. So what I would like to ask, and anyone can grab the phone, and if all of you guys wants to give me a quick answer, that's okay too, but I don't know if we're going to be able to scale if we do this, is why does IPv6 matter to your organization? So you may have covered this a little bit. So what is the real motivators? Is it because you're doing Internet of Things? Or is it because you worry about the new trend of bringing your own device to work? What's really driving you behind this? Hi, Irena.
So for Google in particular, a very powerful business case is, of course, innovation, because we believe that IPv6 is going to allow for the continuous growth of Internet, and basically we also want to provide access to information to all our users, no matter if they use IPv4 or IPv6 to access our websites and services, right? And apart from innovation, I can also, as Todd says, say that we needed to provide IPv6 inside our internal network just to make sure that our engineers are able to work on testing, creating, and improving the Google products so that they can support IPv6, that they can become IPv6 aware. And also another very important technical driver, as I already mentioned, is that we are running out of IPv4 private addresses inside the organization internally. So to us, IPv6 is the only way to sustain long-term growth, basically, inside our organization. Because we tried, of course, to introduce NAT, but as you all know here, maybe NAT introduces additional layers of complexity, like, for example, it's almost impossible to write and to read logs, so it introduces also like security concerns, right? And along with that, we wanted to help solving this chicken and egg problem that everyone was already talking about. Basically, the ISP is saying that there is no content, and the content provider is saying that there is no IPv6 access to for the end user. So by enabling IPv6 inside our internal network, we wanted to make a positive contribution to that, so that this way the Google engineers can work on IPv6 ready products.
And that's clearly changing. I mean, what Google is doing is clearly changing the face. Anyone else wants to pick up? Go ahead.
We actually have 3 reasons. I mentioned the first one, which is credibility. If you write about IPv6, we have to do that ourselves. The second one is that we are doing a lot of business with Asia. We need lots of information from Asian hardware vendors, hardware suppliers. We didn't run into the problem yet, but we want to be prepared for the first customer partner there who runs IPv6 only. That's the reason why we are turning our internet-facing infrastructure dual stack. And there's a third reason why we should do IPv6. We've run into problems with IPv4. We're a small organization. It's not running out of the IPv4 addresses, but we sometimes have to connect our network to business partners' networks to exchange data immediately. And almost every time you run into the problem of using the same address spaces. So IPv6 could be a solution there, but it's not for us, because to solve those problems right now, And because both of the partners don't have IPv6 running yet, we have to solve that in IPv4 space. So that's more for the far future to help us there when we run into the actual IPv4 problems.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to grab it? Okay.
For CERN, there are two main reasons. So we are, like Airbus, we don't want to miss to reach our customers in any place on the world. So one of our mission is to distribute data. So we want to be able to send this data to everyone. And another reason is because we are moving from our data center from a real data center to implementing virtual machines widely. And also there we will need plenty of IP addresses. And this, we could have enough IPv4 addresses, but having the plentiness of the huge amount of IPv6 addresses will make the deployment much easier.
Do you have an outreach program with your scientists to educate them as to what else they could do with this technology, or not yet?
Yes. So
okay.
We will train, we will inform our users during this year. And in 2013, when we will deploy it, we hope everyone will be informed. And
okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, as a university, we try to educate students, and they were one of our customers. Besides the computer science department that really wanted access to V6 so that they could do innovative things that we haven't thought about yet. The same with the computer science department. They wanted to test sensory, the Internet of Things. I'm not sure what exactly, because that's not my core business, but they are going to experiment with that kind of stuff this year. Also, we had the same problem like Johannes. We are in the middle of merging some schools of higher education, and they all use the same non-routable IP space. So we are going to have lots of clashes, and we're not really want to use net. So we're looking into V6 to maybe solve that issue.
Excellent. One more, Ron. You want
Yes. I think as I think about what motivated us to deploy IPv6, it was really an evolution over many years. It started in the late 90s with us being a research organization. It was something new and interesting and different to try. I mean, we were there pioneering IP when it first came out in the 70s, and now it was try the new thing, find out about it. But then as we started looking at it, we became concerned, is it secure? Are there any performance impediments? We did a lot of testing and studies to convince ourselves that, yes, it's as secure, it performs as well. The next issue was, oh dear, this has to be deployed in the rest of the government and elsewhere at some point. We need to really test this because we were noticing a lot of missing features and bugs. Let's work these out quickly with the vendors so that when the rest of the world needs it, it will be ready. And then we spent many years doing that. But after that, it started feeding itself because we started seeing benefits of V6 that nobody else had ever predicted or seen just because of the large address space and some other benefits. Able to do things we were never able to do before, improve security because of what we can do with our addressing plans, routing tables are smaller, convergence is faster with SLAC instead of DHCP and things like that. People are seeing the benefits as this actually works better than the old V4 stuff. Now it's just feeding itself.
Thank you. So at this point, do we have a question from the audience? Okay, so let's go to my, whoops. Let's go to my next question. So we heard most of you already presented your strategy, your deployment strategy. So what would be, if you had a couple of advice to give somebody in the audience that hasn't done this transition yet, what would be your advice? What would you do differently if you could do it differently? What would be your recommendation to the vendors selling you products? You know, you're king of one day and you say, this is what would make my world so much easier if I could deploy this technology this way. So who wants to take this question? Todd?
So a couple pieces of advice that I have is don't do transition technology if you don't have to, because they are painful to support. And I think it's important that you, from our perspective, addressing is critical. Having a good addressing philosophy and an addressing plan is it will save you so much pain on the backside. It's really critical that you have a good addressing plan when you start. And for us, I think it was important to start at the core and work our way out. That was what I thought was the best solution versus trying to work from the outside in. But the main point is if you don't have to do any kind of transition technologies, don't do them.
Who else wants to answer? Go ahead.
My advice would be think services. Instead of calling your vendor for, I would like to have my router IPv6 enabled, and then at the end figuring out that, the website you would like to build does not support IPv6. You should start thinking, what do I want to achieve? What service would I like to provide to my citizens, my clients, my businesses? So start with a service and then make sure that service works for the whole chain, and then it's more easier. At least that's my opinion. And the second one is actually ask your vendors, nag them, vote with your wallet. Quite often vendors say, okay, we do support IPv6 until you start testing it. And until you really, really want it enabled, then there's this fine print about, yeah, but you have to wait for perhaps the next version. Or maybe, well, you have to pay some extra. So make sure that they get the message that you want IPv6 and that you want it now and not in the next model.
So yeah, I would say, to jump on this, it is our job to demand functional product. We are in 2012. It's no longer acceptable to say, yeah, well, it works for this, but not really this. And actually to plug the US government again, and what Tim and Eric are doing at the UNH with the US government, is that they ask for a standard declaration of conformance. That is to say, every vendors that follow those rules of engagement will say, this is what I can do with V6, and this is what I cannot do with V6. The cannot part will help you when you do your deployment. Ron?
Yeah, one of the mistakes we made, and I've seen in other organizations, is that if you strictly have a bottom-up approach, that is, you just have some engineers interested in IPv6 start turning it on the routers and hope it permeates the organization, it doesn't happen. Because too often, if it's a large bureaucracy, the networking people are different from the people who run the web servers, because that's public affairs, or the people that run the DNS servers, because that's a separate DNS shop and so forth. And you can't have just one group trying to push it with the other one saying we're not interested. You really need the top-down component where the chief information officer or someone else says, we're going to do this, it has to permeate the organization, and you need a corporate culture of IPv6 so that every new initiative has IPv6 as a component. And then the other thing is, don't wait till the last minute. I plan on taking 5 years at least, because then as you do tech refresh, you can incorporate IPv6 in all new procurements. If you wait till the last minute as we're reaching deadlines and other things, now you're talking forklift upgrade, major CapEx, and so forth. And too many have waited to the last minute and did not heed the warnings that have been coming out since at least 2003. So if you plan early, you can do it with no additional staff, no additional money, just part of tech refresh. And so that's what most should be doing.
And also instills a culture of sharing, put up a wiki where you can share your best practices. Don't work in a corner. Really, everybody will benefit from a common knowledge. Mark?
Maybe you already told what I would like to say, because don't panic, but start now. That's one thing. And the other is, you need the management buy-in, because in many companies, especially in the industries and in the manufacturing areas, it's driven by the IT guys, by the techies, because they know about it, but the management doesn't. And you have to convince and tell the management, this is a new technology, you cannot avoid it. It will come this year, next year, maybe in 5 years, maybe latest in 10 years, it will be there, and you have to face it. If you start now taking care, you will be prepared, you will have no additional effort, as you mentioned, and this kind of stuff. So convince your management, get the buy-in, and start now with the plannings.
One more data point. I think you guys keep making me think, don't apply today's thinking, the rate at which things change, fast, slow, your way of analyzing, but it is changing. Status quo is not an option, so you've got to move forward. Anybody else? wants to grab this question? Okay. Question from the audience? Oh, I see couple. Anyone? No, it's coming. Oh. That's not fair. That's our friend from Google that is asking a question. Go ahead.
I used to work for Google.
Go ahead.
I just had a question for about, is there adequate consulting or practical help for organizations like you? Are people having to learn how to implement these things on their own repeatedly, or is there best practices that can be shared? What's the best way for each individual organization to get up to speed and not have to read a bunch of books and just try it out in a lab?
That's actually a good question.
Yeah, that's actually a good question, because we all know how the engineers get excited when it comes to new technologies. However, that's not the case with the operations, with the ops people. They are afraid, they have fear, and so on. So in Google, we learned that, of course, training is very important for within all kind of groups, but it's especially helpful if you have a hands-on training right before the deployment starts, so that everyone can basically touch the technology in labs or some kind of special environments. But yeah, having a hands-on training is very important.
So do you foresee an external body that would actually provide that kind of consultancy? He's not listening. Okay. Anyone else wants to take that question?
I actually see a large problem there for smaller organizations like ours. With the lack of operational experience overall, there is a lack of people who have that experience to tell us about that. So there's a lot of material about IPv6, but it's also in a bad status in a way that it's all very theoretical. You can read about every single, protocol, but there is still documentation and training missing that really points how you will really do that. That's the best practices missing.
Okay, so that's really on us. So there was another question. Oh, and another one. Oh God. Okay.